So I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled to welcome Peter Rogoff and Dena Morris to the conversation today. Peter, many of you saw in 2015 when he spoke at the first Music Cities Convention here in Washington, D.C., when he was wearing his hat as a Department of Transportation official. Dena Morris, many of you know because she's been co-leading the Seattle REVS cohort for the last bunch of months. What we're talking about today is what is going to take shape in terms of this new administration. What does this mean in practicality? What kind of jobs are going to get filled? How do those jobs get filled? What is the potential impact on us as a community? What do we need to know? And Peter and Dena are perfect to speak on this, both because they have experience working in the administration. Dena at CDC, Peter, as you said, at Department of Transportation and Federal Transit Authority or Administration, what is the FTA? And the FTA, and also they both worked in the Senate. And the Senate has a lot to do with who gets approved for political appointees and cabinet officials, things like that. So first, Peter, Dena, thank you for joining us. Say hi.
Right, unmute. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. We are parenthetically married, and we are doing this on two different floors of the same house. So just to not have.
We were wondering if it was going to be a side-by-side sitch or no. This is good.
We're trying to not have the audio reverb as we do this.
No, that sounds good. Peter, what is your background? That's quite a thing we're looking at behind.
That is a Seattle light rail tunnel. I could get out of the way.
There you go.
There are some workers going through and inspecting it.
So before we get started, talk a little bit about your position out at Sound Transit. So what is your role out in the region?
So I am chief executive of an entity called Sound Transit. It is the regional 3-county transit provider that runs commuter rail, light rail, and express bus service for King County, Pierce County, and Snohomish County. So we run commuter rail all the way from Everett to Seattle, down to Tacoma, even on to further south on Lakewood, and that will be expanding. We're currently doing the largest transit expansion program in America, going to about 96 miles of light rail in all 4 directions. So exciting times out here.
Amazing. Okay, so for today's topic, so this is an interesting time. I mean, we have one administration leaving, we have another one starting to come together. I mean, let's just start big picture. Like, how many jobs need to be filled? I mean, I could have Googled this, but I thought let's just go off our gut. I mean, what are we looking at across the entire sort of federal agency sort of system?
Yeah, it's a big number, and it varies from administration to administration. But I would say 4,000 new jobs or 4,000 jobs that need to be filled is a very conservative figure. I've seen numbers as high as 9, but I think that also includes some of the non-competitive positions in the legislative branch. So let's just say several thousand. And they range from cabinet secretaries, ambassadors, and judges to assistant secretaries. There's a lot of assistant secretaries at all of the agencies, and Schedule Cs. And a Schedule C is obviously a bureaucratic term that basically captures people who have political credentials, but are a little bit more on the junior or mid-level range as opposed to a senior or an executive range. And then, of course, there are, it gets bureaucratic really quickly, doesn't it?
No, we're doing it.
There are non-career senior executive service positions. And what that means basically is that you can become qualified to slot in at a senior executive level if you have the political forces behind you. And then finally, there are probably, I forget what the number is, but there's at least 100 White House positions. So, you know, there's the Domestic Policy Council and the National Economic Council and the National, you know, there are all these positions inside the White House, not to mention the advance work and the protocol people and the people who handle all the mail for the White House. So there's a lot of jobs.
So this gets really important for the conversation we've been having the last 2 days at the conference. And of course, Dina, you've seen this in your REVS workout in Seattle, and so this isn't rocket science, but I think there are two sort of key points here that we want to make, and this is why we wanted to host this session. I mean, the first is that any effective advocacy on the music side is really rooted on finding your champions inside government who have power, who have relationships, who have leverage, and have the ability to see that music is something that aligns with what they're trying to accomplish, no matter what their sort of brief is, whatever their portfolio is. So if you're going to be effective at the local level in music activism, music policy, you're figuring out who those champions are and you're building those relationships. When we take it to the federal level, we've talked a lot about, again, the assumption, and I'd love your all's take on this because you could tell me I'm wrong and then we'll just stop the Zoom. But, the assumption that this administration, the incoming Biden administration, is going to be, really much more engaged in the sort of holistic functioning of the federal government and the interconnection of all these different agencies. And from the arts and music side, that means going back to things that happened in the Obama administration and potentially accelerating those to basically have, the NEA working sort of in concert with these agencies to understand sort of the arts and culture implications of policymaking at Department of Transportation, at Department of Education, at Health and Human Services, at all these different agencies. So the potential and I think the likelihood are that people are going to be coming into the administration, into these agencies that potentially either have an arts focus or are going to be open to understanding what the nightlife economy means, what the cultural economy looks like. I mean, these different sort of things that are part of the music economy are going to be fitting into these conversations in a way that certainly we haven't seen in the last 4 years. So using that as and actually, would you agree with that frame, or would you build off that frame just as we begin this conversation?
I want to just do a quick react to that, and then Peter, send it over to you because I think you have a better perspective on how that can work. And my quick react, Michael, is that for sure the incoming administration is going to be more cognizant of that and more connected than the current administration. I'm going to go there. But also it's really complicated, right? Because the federal bureaucracy is huge, complicated. Everyone has more work than they have time and capacity and resources to do. And so these kind of cross-discipline, cross-agency initiatives, they do happen, they can happen, they will happen, they're really hard. Mm-hmm. And I just want to pick up on one thing you said in the opening, which is that you have to find the people who are moved by music. You have to find the people who have the vision, the people who say, this matters for all of these reasons, and finding that champion inside who's also in a position to help make those things happen is what's going to matter. And ideally that's at the White House, but I think it could be in other places. And Peter, when you were in the executive branch, I know you were a part of some of those, was it smart cities or some of those broad...
Smart cities, smart communities, it was called. Yeah, I would agree. There are a lot, or at least there were during the Obama-Biden administration, and I was there for 7 of their 8 years. There's a lot of interagency working groups, and some got a lot more traction than others. And I think, especially when it comes to the arts and music, you really do want to have some advocates who might be of the disposition to remind people when they weren't invited to that meeting why they should be. Because I think that's going to be really important. Because, we had, one of the more successful entities that we had was a working group that we made sure trickled down to the local level, and that's also really important. You can have all kinds of White House meetings, and the DPC can convene people, and there can be a whole bunch of talking heads in Washington talking to each other, each trying to impress everyone about how smart they are, and have that whole thought process and the initiatives that come from it never trickle out to America. We did something when we partnered with the Transportation Department, partnered with HUD and EPA, and it was in the first term. And it was very successful in just in terms of trying to cut down silos and break through regulatory hurdles, because there was so much commonality with our actual agendas of those three agencies, in terms of cleaning up the air, providing affordable housing access to affordable transportation access, just trying to lift up communities in financial need. But importantly, we made sure that not only were we having these meetings routinely in Washington, D.C., we made each of the 10 regional offices. So there's Region 10 is housed here in Seattle, and all three of those agencies have people in the federal building here. And they were defining how all of this blah, blah talk in Washington, D.C. should actually play out in the states of Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And frankly, their work was more important than ours. We just had to lead and say, go do it. And a lot of the creativity came from the local level on how to get it done. So when you're talking about trying to get arts and music a seat at the table, it's going to be important to have some strong advocates that compel people to be at the table. When I was Undersecretary of Transportation in the second term, I would sometimes be told by the National Economic Council who I had to invite to meetings, and I would sometimes wonder why, but I had to invite them to the meetings because the White House said so. Right. And that's having those advocates, as Dina points out, it's going to be really important.
So let's talk about some of these jobs that are going to be filled. And why don't we just start? We can just kind of, again, this is all top level stuff. We're not going to get too in the weeds, and we're going to be making some generalizations, of course. But I mean, let's just start right now with the transition process. So what is the transition team? Like, what does that? Who's on the transition team? How do you talk to the transition team? Conceptually, not literally.
So the transition team it's a little bit opaque. So it's a fair question. They are made up of both policy experts and veterans and political allies of the incoming team. Their principal mission is to tee up and try to identify those issues that might be burning the house down when a new secretary gets there. So I think they're principally charged with focusing on, the four major things that the Biden administration has talked about. Getting a handle on COVID, obviously being number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, but then things, related to climate and the economy. And also issues that will be specific to that department. And the best help they can be is, you need to understand, when the new administration starts and, within days of inauguration, maybe cabinet secretaries will be confirmed by the Senate. But all the other political jobs will remain vacant and can for many, many months. I mean, I was one of the earlier political arrivals at DOT, and I wasn't confirmed till May. A lot of folks didn't show up till summer, some not till the fall. And we had a fairly functional confirmation process for that administration, right? So having some, if you will, the democratic imprint on what the policy objectives should be and what they should be looking out for. I mean, the way I have found to be most helpful to the transition team is to flag some things that could be burning down the house when they walk in the door. Because that's what you need to worry about is stepping into a crevasse, when you walk in there. And then, new cabinet secretaries will bring their own team, some Schedule Cs with them, not, folks who don't need to be confirmed by the Senate. And the more those political appointees start occupying their desks, the more the focus would be from what the transition team identified to what they're discovering on their own as the earliest, most important things.
I think I would add to that the transition team is also looking for talent. So, you'll hear rumors, there's a lot of parlor games about, who's going to be the Secretary of Treasury, or where are we going to put Pete Buttigieg, there's a lot of that. But there's also like, you really need talented people who bring credibility to the issues. And the transition team is also, I think, has feelers out to see like who's out there. And then there is a connection, almost a pipeline really from the transition team to the Office of Presidential, what is it called? OPP?
Presidential personnel.
Presidential personnel. And that's the Office of Presidential Personnel, which is housed in the White House, is where the political appointees come from, basically. Like that's the employment office. Sorry, Peter, you wanted to add?
Well, I'd add a little bit more granularity to that. 2 points just to augment what Dina's saying. One, there are people who are working for the transition who are not identified as being on the transition team. So there's more bodies out there than just those folks. Those are, if you will, the branded folks, because they either, they come from a union, they come from a university, or they come from experience in the field. And those people are working on personnel. The other thing I would just mention is not all political appointees originate, if you will, in the Office of Presidential Personnel. And I think this is really important. I mean, we've been talking about like high level, in some cases, Senate confirmable positions and stuff. There are, as Dina rightly pointed out, like thousands of others where the political appointees themselves might go and say, we've got this great young person who wants to work on our team, really smart, experienced in the field. We'd like to bring them on as a Schedule C appointee. They will have to be vetted through the White House, but they don't necessarily originate, from a White House process. They could originate from the departments themselves.
So let's just go through this real quick. So what does it mean to be a Senate, go through Senate confirmation process? What are the leverage points that the Senate have in terms of dictating who is able to get through that process? What does that mean in terms of who the administration even wants to put up for a job because of what that might mean in terms of the Senate confirmation process? Could you just, quickly walk through that? And, Dina, this might be a good one for you.
I would like to speak to that. Peter mentioned in passing that in 2009, there was a fairly productive and constructive confirmation process, and that has really ground to almost nothing. The confirmation process has become increasingly political, increasingly partisan, just like everything else. If the 2 Georgia Senate races that have to be run again in January, if both of those send 2 Democrats to the Senate, then we have a chance to actually put some people through there, because then we'll have 50 Democratic senators. We need 50 yeses for a confirmation. If either of those races send a Republican to the Senate, we're going to see a very different kind of dynamic in terms of who Biden can nominate and how their confirmation process will go. If we don't have 50 aye votes for a candidate, then the president has to take a step back and say, okay, am I going to fight for this person? How much political capital am I going to spend? How much time are we going to invest to get this person in? Or do we just say, okay, you don't like Peter Rogoff, let me go find Michael Bracey and maybe you'll like him better.
Absolutely.
It's a good idea. It gets very political very quickly. In 2010, maybe 11, the Senate did some reform, I think they would call it. So it used to be that there were like 3,000 people who had to be confirmed by the Senate. It's now about, no, that's an exaggeration. Anyway, I think we peeled about 500 people off of the list of those who need to be confirmed. So for instance, a lot of assistant secretaries no longer need to be confirmed. A lot of people who go to fill independent agencies and commissions no longer need to be Senate confirmed. And there's also an expedited process for some of those who were sort of in the middle. But the idea that just to speak for a minute about the politics inside the Democratic Party, you know, there are, and Peter's talked about this a lot here at home, but there are people who feel like, you know, we brought the gay vote, we brought the Black vote, we brought the female vote, we brought the urban vote. And all of those people are going to feel like you, President Biden, now have to do stuff for us, right? Because we got you in office. And that's going to shape the nomination process and who actually fills those jobs. And so if there are fewer than 50 Democratic senators, it's going to be very difficult to bring in anyone for a senior executive position who has extreme positions on anything. And I'll use that word loosely, but I don't know if that answers the question you asked.
No, it does. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because we have other things we want to talk about, but it is worth saying that, you know, not only are we going through an unprecedentedly complicated time in terms of processing the presidential election, but there is really going to be some uncertainty pending what happens in Georgia and even beyond what happens in Georgia, if there is going to be any sense of regular order of the Senate allowing these and allowing anybody to come through. And the president's going to make some very tough decisions about leaving positions open and just not putting candidates up for them or going through the process. And a lot of that, again, that's why the January 5th stuff is so critical. Oh, another reason why January 5th is so critical, just in terms of who controls the nomination and the approval process there. So I want to talk about a different trash of jobs, different level of jobs. Tranche? I don't know. I can't talk anymore. It's been a long couple of days. So a bunch of folks are going to, let's just play fantasy land that a bunch of people are approved for these cabinet secretaries, undersecretaries, positions of a lot of power. Oftentimes they're bringing their own teams with them. So a lot of people in this conference are going to have someone that they do work for or they have worked for is going to get be nominated and confirmed for a position, and they're going to be able to put together a team. And so oftentimes people are going to come in and they'll say, well, as long as so-and-so, is in that position, I'm going to be, part of their core executive leadership team, which could be for 3 years, it could be for 5, for a number of years. So could you speak to those types of jobs, which are, sort of like chief of staff type jobs or or admin, oftentimes they're just sort of like helping get stuff done, just, body people kind of jobs. So what does that tend to look like? Yeah.
So there are a lot of those positions, and these are, what we were referring to as Schedule C positions, and they really do range. We would have special assistants to the deputy secretary, and it's a great opportunity for young, energetic folks who really, because there's really like no limit to what and how involved they could get in the process. We had, among the special assistants we had at the Department of Transportation, some were, if you will, celebrated schedulers and advance people, which has it's very important that those jobs get done and get done well. I saw some of them just get put in remarkably important positions of authority just because they showed their shit. I mean, they showed their ability to take on weighty policy issues. And the other thing is, sometimes you send them to carry the DOT flag, in our case, at a meeting because that issue and that meeting didn't seem so important. And guess what? Something else happens internationally and that becomes the most important issue. And they were the person on the spot doing that work when that issue spiked up, right? So it's a great, area for opportunity. Yes, some people bring their own teams with them. I think everyone, let's also remember I expect that, I don't think Biden's going to be filling all these positions with people from Washington, D.C. I think he's going to be bringing in, governors and mayors and things like that. And yes, they will bring some of their own people, but they will also be looking for talent, right? And I will tell you, the first cabinet secretary I worked for, he brought 2 people with him. We had 116 political appointees, right? And The second cabinet secretary brought one.
Yeah.
And those are important people that make, the leader feel comfortable and at home and have a certain level of trust and safety. But in the end, it really is about assembling a team. And you want that team to be not only diverse along the issues of what Dina talked about, but diverse in, thinking and experience. That I would argue is where a lot of the opportunity lies. And don't belittle the influence that those people could have just because they don't bear the title of deputy secretary, undersecretary, or assistant secretary.
That's what's so great about the federal government is that there's, like I said earlier, there's always more work than there are people and time and resources. And so anything could happen, right? I mean, people just get in the way of business that's happening and suddenly they have a pretty significant role. So I think there's a tremendous amount of potential. And I will also say, while I have the mic, the good news is there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of jobs. But to be real, there's also a lot of politics and a lot of bureaucracy. So, if anyone who's listening is actually considering pursuing a position, I heartily encourage you to do that, but also just no. It's a very political process and there's a lot of bureaucracy.
And I think, Dina, to build off that, I mean, part of what we've talked about the last 2 days is, what I think is what many would think, I would certainly think, and I think a lot of people would share this, has been sort of an inspirational level of service and engagement in the music community, not only in this awful year of COVID, but, previously enough this. I mean, there are a lot of people who have been in this community fighting for better structures, more equity. I mean, a lot of things for a long, long time. And part of, again, why we want to do this session is I want to posit that if you are interested in music activism and advocacy and building better structures, being on the inside, for 4 years you can do a lot more good, inside than you can just being another person on the outside, who's trying to shape policy. I mean, you can actually get in the thick of it and make things happen. So we've talked a little bit about, so right now, again, the transition team's out there. There are names that are published. Biden has a transition website you can go to. You can see if you know people who are on the working groups and committees. I mean, so that's one part of the process. The government at the executive level is going to be shaped. We're going to start to see names. A lot of that's going to depend on what happens in Georgia in terms of the timing and how that all plays out. But people are going to start to get appointed to jobs. People, again, in this conference, people that they work for are going to start getting these jobs. People that you may know. We've talked about a lot of these jobs are also going to be filled by people that don't have an existing relationship with the leadership team. They're looking for talent. They're looking for hustle. Unfortunately, I don't know if that's the right word, but the executive branch has been gutted in the last 4 years. A lot of career people have left. It's just been a very difficult time to work in federal agencies. So there may be more positions that could be career path, if that's something that's interesting to you, that may be available. And let's talk a little bit as we kind of wrap up, and if anybody has questions, throw them in the chat or in the Q&A window. But let's talk about the regional positions. Peter, you just referenced that earlier, federal positions where people are working at home outside of DC in the regions. What does that tend to look like, and how do people sort of try to get in that mix?
Well, that is a real hodgepodge as well, and it's really unique depending on the agency. Some of the senior regional people, often sometimes referred to as regional administrators, are political appointees, and in other agencies they are not. So I can give you 2 examples. HHS, the regional administrator is politically appointed. In DOT, or at least for things like the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, that have their own regional administrators, they're all senior civil service people. And Dina just put up in the chat the link to the famed Plum Book. And the Plum Book is now a listing of all of the positions political at a certain level. Some, it's a little odd because some of them are senior civil service that are out there. And it's really just a snapshot of how the prior administration has organized itself in terms of what positions are there. That doesn't mean that the new administration will organize themselves identically. But yeah, I mean, there are positions at the regional level, and there are also many career positions at the regional level. I'd like to echo something that you just said, Michael. You know, it's the career civil servants that is the glue that kind of holds it all together. And yes, you know, as someone who used to have hundreds that worked for me, I worried about folks leaving during the Trump administration, in part because I knew we would know them when we got the White House back. And I hope some of those people consider coming back, but don't think that those positions aren't influential. They are, and one should not just set their sights on political positions. I would just add something to what you said before about people who want to be advocates and bring that advocacy into the federal government. You know, you just learn a ton by actually going in and doing the work, which would make you even a better advocate later when you got out. I mean, there's plenty of reasons to do it.
Yeah. And then I'd like to just kind of make two more comments as we kind of wrap. You know, one is Washington's a really interesting town, and the city kind of, y'all don't have to agree with this assessment, but you know, I feel like the city takes on sort of the energy of the leadership of who's in charge and the agenda, and there are moments where this town is a remarkable place to be, and it's dynamic and exciting and entrepreneurial, and you can just feel just the energy in a way that's just really, really powerful. And you know, for those, you know, in the conference who maybe wouldn't have thought of coming to Washington and doing some work here and being part of that process, I'd really encourage you to think about it, because again, just to, you know, to Peter's point, you know, coming in, working inside the government, getting that understanding of how these things work, that's going to be so powerful wherever you go in your life and your career. And the other point I'd make, and again, the music issues should not be partisan, and they typically are not partisan, but because the Democratic administration is coming in, something that's different between the Democrats and Republicans is that the Republicans have a much greater think tank ecosystem in Washington. So they have a lot of people who will work for one administration, and then when they're out of power, they'll just hang out in Washington working at like Heritage Foundation and these other think tanks. Democrats don't really have that at that scale, which means when this government is going to be staffed, there's not like all hundreds of like these people have been hanging out think tanks ready to go back in government. You know, they're going to be going out all across the country, to Peter and Dina's point, looking for young, motivated, smart, committed people who want to come in and do this stuff. So I just would really, really hope that, you know, we're going to get 5 or 6 of the delegates who are part of this conference, you know, in these positions in Washington, helping make this stuff happen. And it really could be transformative for all the work that we're trying to do here, you know, in this community. So with that, I think you guys have been very generous with your time as always, and your expertise in terms of how this stuff all works. And you know, this is probably the dorkiest segment I've ever produced in 20 years of doing a conference, and I'm glad that you guys won that award. So
I'm glad that we could be on the Dork panel. Thank you for that honor, Michael.
There it is, team. There it is. Dina and Peter, thank you so much. We are going to be taking about a 25-minute break, and then we're going to come back with a closing session starting right at 2:00 Eastern. Thank you, everybody.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right.